You ever hear something that just makes you stop for a second and go, wait, how come nobody ever talked about this? Like one of those moments that makes you realize there's way more going on behind the scenes than we'll ever know. Man, that's exactly how I felt when I came across this story about Queen Elizabeth and what she supposedly said about Islam toward the end of her life. I'm not talking about the usual royal PR stuff or some quote in a press release. I'm talking about her actual reflections, the quiet, personal thoughts she shared only with the people closest to her, stuff that never made it to the news. Now, think about who we're talking about here. Queen Elizabeth II, the woman literally lived through almost a century of history. Wars, revolutions, technology changing the world, religions clashing, cultures blending, and through all of it she stayed this calm, collected, almost mysterious figure. You never really knew what she personally believed. That was her thing. She didn't take sides, didn't make emotional statements, just that iconic composure, that royal poker face. So when I heard there were these private comments, like actual words she said about Islam, about the way she viewed Muslims and their faith, it instantly grabbed me. And here's what's wild. Apparently, she had a deep respect for Islam. Not the kind of fake respect politicians throw around to sound inclusive. No, this was more personal. People close to her said she admired the discipline, the devotion, the sense of peace Muslims have when they pray. She once said something about how the world could learn a kind of balance from the Islamic way of life, that there's beauty in their humility before God. Man, think about that. A queen who ruled over a kingdom that once colonized half the Muslim world, quietly expressing admiration for Islam. That's heavy. That's not just politically correct talk. That's a genuine reflection of someone who'd seen the whole spectrum of human belief and still found truth in something outside her own religion. And you know what's fascinating? There's this story that during her trips to Muslim-majority countries like Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Malaysia, she would go out of her way to learn the local customs, even the meanings behind certain prayers. She had these conversations with imams and scholars, and by all accounts she listened more than she spoke. One guy, a British diplomat who was there in the 80s, said she once asked a question that totally surprised everyone. How do you keep faith alive in a world that constantly pulls you toward ego? Like, that's not small talk. That's a deep question, man. That's the kind of thing you ask when you're actually thinking about spirituality, not just following tradition. And I get it. She was raised in a system where religion was political. The Church of England, royal duty, the whole divine right of kings thing. But Islam, for her, seemed to represent something different. It wasn't about ruling people. It was about surrendering to something greater than yourself. And that hit her, I think. She saw something in that. You ever wonder why we don't hear more about that side of her? The spiritual curiosity? Because think about it. This woman had met everyone. Presidents, popes, sultans, the Dalai Lama. And yet she kept her thoughts private. Maybe because she knew the media would twist it. Maybe because deep down she realized that spirituality is something you can't politicize. It's something you feel. There's another moment that really stuck with me. Apparently, during her Diamond Jubilee, she mentioned in a private conversation, this was later retold by someone in her circle, that faith is strongest where hardship is constant. She was referring to how Muslims around the world maintain belief even through poverty, war, or exile. She said she admired that consistency, that surrender, like even when the world is falling apart, they still bow down 5 times a day. Man, that's real. That's something most people don't get. In the West, we've made faith so optional. It's like a lifestyle choice. But for Muslims, it's their compass. And I think she respected that. And here's the craziest part. Some of her advisors actually talked about how she kept a copy of the Quran that was gifted to her during a royal visit. She didn't make a big deal of it, didn't display it, but it was there. And supposedly she said it was one of the most beautifully written texts she'd ever read. Now, whether she meant that literally or spiritually, we don't know. But man, imagine the Queen of England quietly reading the Quran in Buckingham Palace. That's wild. What I find interesting is how her reflections kind of bridge this huge gap between East and West. Because, let's be honest, we live in a world that loves division. Religion versus religion, nation versus nation. But here's this woman, Arguably one of the most powerful figures in modern history, and in her final years she wasn't talking about power or legacy, she was talking about humility, faith, and unity. That says a lot, and I don't think she was trying to convert anyone or make a statement. I think it was deeper. When you're that close to the end of your life, man, you start stripping away the noise, you start asking what really matters, and for her maybe Islam represented a kind of stillness, a simplicity that she never got to live with. Think about it, born into power, surrounded by wealth, every move scripted, every word analyzed, and then you encounter a religion that's all about letting go of control. That contrast must have hit her on a soul level. You ever get that feeling like the truth is hiding in plain sight, but we ignore it because we're too caught up in our own perspective? That's what this whole thing feels like. The Queen saw beauty in something most of her empire once misunderstood. And the fact that we're only hearing whispers about it now, not documentaries, not official statements, tells you everything. Some truths are just too human for politics to handle. And I'll tell you what, if more world leaders actually looked at faith the way she apparently did, with curiosity instead of judgment, man, the world would be a different place. She didn't look at Islam as a threat or a rival. She looked at it as a mirror showing a side of humanity that maybe we've forgotten. So when I think about Queen Elizabeth's untold words, it's not about controversy. It's about wisdom. It's about an old woman who'd seen it all: power, corruption, beauty, tragedy, and in the end found herself quietly acknowledging the peace and purpose in another faith. And that's the kind of story that doesn't make headlines, but it should. Because it reminds you that underneath the crowns and titles and politics, there's just a human being searching for meaning, just like the rest of us. Man, imagine that. The Queen of England in her final reflections, finding truth not in palaces or ceremonies, but in the humble bow of prayer, the act of surrender that defines Islam. That's not just history, that's humanity.